And welcome back. The Bronx-wide Coalition is a coalition of faith, labor, and organizations from across the borough of the Bronx. Now, the coalition seeks to build a democratic economy which centers on racial justice and cooperative ownership, supports freedom, and promotes dignity and well-being for the many, for the profits of a few. Over, I should say, the profits of a few. And joining us now, we're pleased to have the Senior Director for Planning and Education at Bronx Cooperative Development Initiative, Evan Casper-Futterman, and then also Delegate at Bronx-wide Coalition, Sonyi Lopez. And we welcome you both to the show, and thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you for having us here, Daren.
Thank you. And Sonyi, you're no stranger, so I'm going to go right at you because you do this. And talk to me a little bit about the Bronx-wide plan.
Sure. Thank you, Daren, for having us. So as you said, Daren, I'm a delegate for We Stay Nos Quedamos and the Bronx-wide Coalition. And the Bronx-wide Plan is basically a set of proposals to help Bronxites take the lead on improving the Bronx. You know, often here in the Bronx, decisions are made without Bronx residents and without Bronx community members being involved in the process. So the plan is a set of ideas and proposals surrounding education and the workforce, energy and environment, food, health, housing and land justice, manufacturing and technology, and transportation and mobility. All of the sectors in our community that would help us, live in the Bronx easier, breathe easier in the Bronx. And that's what the plan primarily is. It's a collection of ideas and a platform.
Yeah. Yeah, several platforms, and when we talk about justice and really bringing about equality, I heard you say, and I think I'll let Evan chime in a little bit more about this. Decisions are sometimes made, not sometimes. I've done this long enough. They're done a lot of times, and many times those persons who live in the community, work in the community, are really not even included in the plan. So, give me from your perspective, Evan, how this really addresses that need.
Yeah, so the Bronx has a really strong history of planning, but it's a bit of a double-edged sword. The Bronx has been planned for, and the Bronx people in the Bronx here have done our own planning historically, right? All the way going back to the Cross Bronx Expressway, the people of Tremont made their own neighborhood plan for the future of the highway and their neighborhoods, and they were ignored, obviously, right? And Robert Moses built the highway straight through the center of the Bronx and all of those communities. People of the South Bronx, of the North Bronx, have created their neighborhood plans throughout the generations, right? Throughout the last several decades. And these plans sometimes win, they sometimes lose. But one of the things we've seen is that people in the Bronx are planners. And if you don't have your own plan, you're being planned for. And we see that over and over again, when people in the Bronx aren't stepping up in their neighborhoods to lead and create their own vision and organize to win that vision for their neighborhood and their community, bad things happen, and other people's voices and other people's ideas end up coming to the fore. And we see that there's a tremendous amount of activity happening right now in the Bronx, across the Bronx. In the North Bronx, you've got Fordham Landing and the Kingsbridge Armory, which are very active development processes right now. In the South Bronx, you have tremendous amounts of new real estate towers and rents rising. In Hunts Point, you have the Hunts Point Forward Plan that's making tremendous changes that are to come for the Hunts Point area. You've got the new Metro North stops, throughout the East Bronx. There's a tremendous amount of activity slated for the future. And what we're seeing is that it is now a time to not only plan in our neighborhoods, but to plan together as one Bronx. And so this coalition came together several years ago in 2018, 2019, with that idea in mind, is we have to build long-term visionary infrastructure, because if we are not the ones planning for our own future, we are being planned for, and we've seen the results of what that looks like over time.
Evan, I want to bring to light this word that's called economic democracy. And from your perspective, how do you break down that word, economic democracy?
Yeah, so economic democracy is this concept where people are often like, I know what that means. And that's a real complex term, and we often get a lot of that kind of, how are you going to explain it and break it down? Economic democracy it's a bit of a paradox, is actually lived daily by thousands of Bronx residents and throughout our city. So the Bronx has a strong history of building shared ownership and building community institutions. The Bronx has a strong history of building cooperative credit unions, right? If you remember BethX from the long-term history that BethX, there's now a group That's one of our proposals on our economic development plan, looking to bring back that history, that legacy of community-owned financial institutions, bring back a Bronx People's Credit Union to the borough after the closing of Bethex. The Bronx has a long history of building cooperative housing, from amalgamated housing in the Northwest Bronx to the many sweat equity buildings that were taken over by residents of the South Bronx when landlords abandoned them. All of those, what are called HDFCs, or limited equity cooperatives. The HDFC is the official term. To the Northeast Bronx, a co-op city, the largest cooperative housing development in the world. All of this providing permanently affordable, dignified housing for people, for thousands of people across the borough. The largest worker-owned business in the country, Cooperative Home Care Associates in Fordham Plaza, just down the road from my house and my office, which provides home care services with higher wages, better benefits, lower turnover in their company, and they do it all by being one of the best employers in the field for home care. They do it by being union, and they do it by being worker-owned. And so economic democracy is about owning and determining together the conditions of our economic lives. It's that principle of democracy that we so often say is missing and could be deepened in our political sphere. It's taking that concept and applying it to our everyday economic lives. And people will say, oh, that's so foreign to the Bronx. But actually what we're saying is there's a strong history of that here in the Bronx, and it needs to be deepened and expanded if we're going to have a different kind of Bronx future than what we've seen happen in places like Western Queens and downtown Brooklyn, where gentrification and development as usual has often been the norm.
Yeah. Sonyi, we bring you in and talk a little bit about some of the things that we're talking here with regards to some of these things. We talk about democratic participation and really having a voice. And when you look at the multitude of issues that really are on the table, break down a couple of them from your perspective, and what would you like to see happen?
Absolutely, Daren. So, to start, I live in the South Bronx, where there's a lot of new development coming up here, and we can't afford these apartments. We can't afford the rent out here, and we're not really part of the development and the proposals where these buildings are going up. And also, we don't have access to the South Bronx waterfront in the South Bronx. And within those proposals are, things like the South Bronx Community Land Act. That will propose that Bronxites have access to the land here, and that we can also take ownership of a center that's been abandoned here, the Lincoln Detox Center, and create what's called a Heart Center, a health, education, and arts center. And it's possible. We know that self-determination and community ownership is possible. And for decades, the Bronx has been neglected, as Evan shared, that history. And that line of investment could shift the trajectory of our neighborhoods. And in the North Bronx, the reason why we're a Bronx-wide coalition and a Bronx-wide plan is because we want the entire Bronx to be involved in this process, not just some catchment areas like the South Bronx and the North Bronx alone, but everyone in the Bronx to be involved in this process. So, as I shared earlier too, Daren, I'm part of Nos Quedamos. We stay Nos Quedamos in this group. And in Melrose here, for as long as I've been born, as long as I've been alive, they've been doing work for 30 years now. Because a group of Bronx residents came together in 1992, when the city created an urban renewal plan in our neighborhoods in Melrose, and they decided that they wanted to oppose, the community members and residents opposed the plan that the city proposed for them, and they created their own plan. And what did the city do? They dropped their plans and decided to include the residents after they spoke out and said, hey, you need to include us. We're living here, we're working here, we're praying here, and we would like to be a part of this process. So I definitely would love to see more of that, and I know that it's possible because we're making it happen every single day here in the Bronx.
There is a huge fear amongst Bronxites and across New York City about gentrification. You look around and you see these new developments going up, but you do have people who are existing and sometimes can't even afford the high price of rent, the increasing rent that goes on. And there's a great fear that in the years to come, we talk about the South Bronx, the Piano District. We've talked about this many times before in areas where you've seen low-income families, instead of tending to the neighborhood, there almost seems to be a push to get people out of the neighborhood. I want to get your thoughts a little bit on the development rather than displacement argument that needs to be made and that needs to be shared by so many.
Absolutely, Darren. I think that there is a possibility for development without displacement. Right across the street from these towers that I was referring to, the arches specifically in the South Bronx, we have the projects, NYCHA, where we have the most affordable housing in the entire world, in the entire country, NYCHA. And it's been disinvested in, not funded in, but we have these new buildings coming up that are being funded in, and we don't have any parts in it. The community cannot live in these spaces. So development without displacement can happen, and one of the ways to do that is through, being sure that you support land act, the Community Land Act and the land trust proposal that's part of our proposal plan. There are so many other proposals. We have 21 on our website, bronx.consider.it. And the plan's website is also Bronx, help me out here, I forgot the name of Bronx-wide Plan.nyc, my bad. But I just want to invite community members to check out the website and also see all these plans and proposals that are here for us to take community ownership of plans and to make sure that housing can be affordable and that there are possibilities for this to happen in our borough.
And Evan, there are some public meetings that people can actually come and be a part of.
Yes, that's right. So this coalition's work began way back in 2019, and one of the most powerful moments for us was as COVID came through and all of our events had to switch to being on Zoom and virtual. We held one of our first biggest events in January 2021. 350 people joined us via Zoom from across the Bronx and actually across the world for that January 2021 meeting. And we're starting up public meetings in person now after sort of being unsure of how to move together on Zoom, in person, what was safe, what was appropriate. We're starting public meetings now, April 5th, 6 p.m. at the YMCA La Centrale. It's 434 Westchester Avenue. So Wednesday, April 5th, we're going to have our first public campaign meeting. We're going to move into this new phase of our work together, building out, launching this plan, helping people understand what we're about, and building the Bronx-wide power we need to win it for the future.
When we talk about community, obviously, that's what we need: community engagement, community awareness. And that's a part of your job, really, is to really make the community more aware, get them galvanized and active. We talk about promoting community engagement. I want to hear from both of you on this area of community engagement, because when you have an organization such as yours that prides itself on that, how successful are you when you raise these issues amongst the community of really seeing a response from people who say, listen, I want to have my voice heard, I will do what it takes, as opposed to sitting back and waiting to see what happens?
Yep, I think that's so important to highlight, Darren. Thank you for asking that. As Evan said, this started in 2018, this group, but we have actually engaged the community in the process of creating these proposals, and these proposals came from community ideas. So people sharing their ideas and writing their ideas down, and us taking them and compiling them and creating 21 proposals. There could have been 100 more, right? And there will be. There's time for us to create proposals together. But out of those community envisioning sessions, 21 proposals came from that. So now it's important that we re-engage the community now that they're all compiled into 21 proposals, so that they can choose which ones are low priority and which ones are high priority. So we're not necessarily voting on which ones to remove and which ones to keep, because we're going to have an opportunity to revisit every single proposal and even come up with new ideas together in future sessions. But I think it's super important to involve the community. I'm a community member. I'm a delegate for an organization, but I also live in the South Bronx. And I think that my voice is important, and my neighbors' voices are important in this process. So I hope that a lot of people come out on April 5th to the YMCA La Central and join us at our event, our public event.
Yeah. Evan, as you look right now, we know the government plays a huge part in legislating and bringing these things to come to pass. And as we engage the community, it's also having to engage with elected officials and making sure that those persons who are making those decisions are making those decisions on behalf of those people who we serve. Give us a little bit about this here. What's the response that you get from elected officials as we hear these community inputs, these community ideas, and they're being submitted upward? What are you getting back from elected officials? Are they attentive or are they dismissive?
Yeah, so I just want to go first and start off with what Sonyi was saying, and just say something about this participatory process and the role of engagement, which is people are, I think, rightfully a little can feel burned or distrustful of engagement processes because they're often being asked for input, but they're not being allowed to really understand the scope of the process or be in a real decision-making role to build collective community power to envision both the process and the outcomes. And so people often say, well, what's really going to happen here, right? Or how is this going to really work? Well, they don't listen to us. And so what we're doing is building that Bronx-wide civic vehicle to say, if we build that infrastructure, if we build that community civic power, it cannot be stopped. It is a force to be reckoned with, but it takes work. And so that is the work we're putting in, is people have to see the ability to be powerful together, and that it's not just about one individual person making a difference, but all of us and our work together. And elected officials recognize this, right? So we have, it's a new day in the Bronx. We've got a lot of new elected officials and new leadership. And I think people are genuinely excited by the opportunity to meet on the terrain of what at the overlap and the intersection of what is needed across the entire Bronx and also what is needed in my district, right? So if you're an elected official, you have multiple competing interests, you have multiple competing goals, you have the needs of your district, you have the needs of your committee, you have multiple things to contend with and consider. And what we're trying to say is we're bringing to the table ideas. We want to work with you. Let us figure out how to make this happen, because other boroughs have had the opportunity to get this kind of investment in their past. There was a plan in several years ago called Vital Brooklyn, over $1 billion of investment in central Brooklyn. There was a newly announced recent plan called Queens Forward that the borough president of Queens announced with support from the governor just in January of this year. And so we're saying, we're bringing the ideas to the table. We have a framework we deeply believe in about building community wealth and economic democracy. And it's time for the Bronx to get our share of those public resources to support the kind of shared ownership and equitable future that the Bronx needs to be successful.
So let me ask a question about how people can actually tap in and be a part of the work that's going on, raising their voice, becoming more aware, and getting this information that's so vital to where they live.
So we have our public meeting coming up on April 5th at 6 p.m. It'll be held at YMCA La Central, and the address is 434 Westchester Avenue. And there we're going to be able to have a public community event where we can talk about the proposals that are on the website. We can answer any questions that people have about the coalition and about the plans and the proposals. And just to list a few, if we have some time there, and just to list some of the proposals, they're the South Bronx Land Community Resource Trust, Food, Fashion, and Fabrication District. We have the Kingsbridge Armory there. We have the Capping the Cross Bronx Expressway proposal. So many different proposals. Evan mentioned another one, the Bronx People's Credit Union, Canna Bronx, which is about the cannabis being now legal in New York City. We want to make sure that community members have an ability for community ownership of certain things when it comes to cannabis, and so many more. But you can check them out at bronx.consider.it, and also visit our website, bronx-wide-plan.nyc, for more information.
Well, Evan, Sonyi, I want to thank you so much for being with us, and certainly great work that's going on. And it's important that residents of the Bronx have their voices heard, but not just have their voices heard, but really see some action for what they put input in. I can't agree with you too much more than to say that when we do look around, so many times we do find that the input is given, and then all of a sudden somebody makes a decision, and many times decisions are made, and the person that's making the decision is clueless as to what is going on in the background. But thank you so much for the work that you're doing, and certainly we're going to follow up and find out how things work out. So thank you both for being with us.
Thank you.
Daren, thank you.